I followed my wife one evening, suspecting infidelity, only to uncover a shocking scene. In a secluded warehouse, she was deeply involved with a notorious drug dealer engaging in a wild party fueled by illegal substances. I secretly filmed the entire ordeal and alerted the authorities. The police raid was swift, and as she was arrested, I confronted her with the divorce papers. Our dreams, our future, shattered in an instant. How do I face our daughter with this truth? How do I rebuild our lives from this devastation? I sat in the car for a few more hours, barely moving, just listening to the radio. Sad country songs played one after another. From a distance, I watched the police officers come and go, removing evidence from the room and the cars. The small crowd from the two hotels quickly dispersed as the commotion died down. Eventually, a couple of tow trucks arrived and took both cars away. I thought about the events of the past 2 weeks and how much my life had changed. Finally, after the last police officers left, I started the car and drove to Gino's. Once inside, I grabbed a beer and collapsed in a booth. About 10 minutes later, Trev came in from work and sat down at the table. He looked at me seriously and finally said, "You're here, not in jail. So it went as planned, but you don't seem happy about it." I told him everything that happened that night and what I had seen. He shook his head and said nothing. After a few minutes, I said, "I'm trying to accept that it's really over. On one hand, I'm glad, but on the other hand, I feel so lost. 2 weeks ago, I knew what I had and where my life was going. Now I don't know anything." Trevor just patted my hand and didn't say anything. We finished our beers and got up to leave. Trevor asked, "Are you ready for your acting job?" I nodded. "I'm not looking forward to it, but I'm as ready as I'll ever be." Trevor smiled sadly and said, "Break a leg." We exchanged keys again, and I got in my truck and drove home. I pulled into the driveway and parked behind Dana's car. As I approached the house, I took a deep breath and walked inside. I was greeted at the door by a very excited babysitter. "Mr. Colville, I thought you were Mrs. Colville." "Hi, Christy, isn't Donna here?" I asked, pretending to be surprised. She shook her head. "She left around 7 and said she'd be home by 1 o'clock or 1:30. It's not like her to be late. Donna and Josie must have gone somewhere after dinner and lost track of time. Or maybe she's at Josie's house," I suggested. Christy looked surprised. "But it wasn't Josie or Mary who took Mrs. Colville. It was a woman named Connie who came to pick her up." "Are you sure? She told me she was having dinner with Josie tonight." Christy nodded. "I'm sure her name was Connie. She comes here sometimes after bringing Mrs. Colville home on Friday nights. I recognized her car when she pulled up tonight." "I only know one Connie, and I couldn't believe she would go anywhere with her," I said slowly. Christy looked uncomfortable. "I don't know anything about it, but she's been bringing Mrs. Colville home the last few Fridays I've been babysitting." She looked at her watch. "But it's 2 o'clock now, and I have to go home." "I'm sorry, Christy, I didn't mean to keep you. I'll call Josie and deal with it. How much do I owe you?" We agreed on the amount, and I walked her to the door and thanked her for looking after Sam, watching her walk down the street. I hoped I sounded convincing. Back in the kitchen, I pulled out my notebook and looked up Josie's number. I knew she'd be annoyed if I called this late, but I needed an alibi. After about 6 rings, a very sleepy voice said, "Hello? Josie, this is Ken Colville." "Ken? What? What time is it?" "It's about 2:30, Josie. I'm sorry to wake you up, but I thought Donna might be there, but she's not home yet." "Ken, I haven't seen Donna since we got home from work, but she said she was going to meet you and Mary for dinner." "Ken, we haven't gone out to dinner on a Friday night in months." "What? That can't be true." "Well, it is. A couple months ago, she wanted to move our dinner to the beginning of the week. She said she met an old neighborhood friend who wanted to take her out. We haven't been out on Friday night since." "Damn. Thanks, Josie. Sorry to bother you so late." I hung up the phone and thought for a moment. I picked up the phone book and dialed the city police department. I told the dispatcher I was concerned that my wife hadn't come home as expected. He said there was nothing they could do unless she had been missing for 24 hours, at which point I could file a missing persons report. I mentioned her name several times to make sure he would remember it. After about 15 minutes, he convinced me to hang up and call back if she was still missing after 24 hours. For several minutes, I sat in the dark kitchen, holding the phone and thinking. Finally, I decided I needed to get some sleep. I knew that in a few hours all sorts of trouble would start, and I needed to be ready for it. I got dressed and went to Sam's room to check on her. She was sound asleep with a smile on her face, probably having pleasant dreams that only the young and truly innocent can have. How I envied her. As I looked at my daughter, a lump formed in my throat and my eyes burned. I didn't want to be alone. I climbed into bed with her, and when she turned to me and opened her sleepy eyes, I said, "It's just Daddy, honey. Go back to sleep," she whispered. "Daddy," closed her eyes, snuggled against my shoulder, and fell asleep again. I lay there, staring into the darkness until I drifted into a restless sleep. I snapped awake at the sound of the phone ringing in our bedroom down the hall. I looked at the clock. It was just after 8. I carefully moved Sam from my arm, swung my legs off the bed, and rushed to the phone. "Hello?" I answered. "Ken, it's Jack. What's going on with Donna?" he practically shouted. Jack was Donna's father. Jack and Brenda, her mother, lived in a small town about 20 miles away. He had been retired for several years, living on a small pension, Social Security, and their savings. They managed to get by. They had moved to be closer to medical care for Brenda's diabetes and blood pressure issues. I liked Jack and Brenda from the start, and we always got along well. They tried to see Sam as often as possible and spoiled her like loving grandparents do. Their son still lived in California with his wife and 2 kids, so Sam got most of their attention. I knew this was going to be especially hard for them. Jack, Donna was gone when I got home from work. The babysitter said she left hours earlier. I called her friend she was supposed to be with, but she hadn't seen her. I even called the police. "Ken, she just called here. She was almost hysterical, crying and saying it was a mistake over and over again. I finally got her to tell me she was in the Eaton County Jail. She couldn't or wouldn't tell me why and wouldn't say if she called you." "What the hell, Jack? You should have called me sooner. I'll get dressed and head over there. Can you and Brenda watch Sam for me?" "Yeah, sure. Whatever you need, Ken." As I hung up the phone, I heard a noise outside the door. I turned around and saw Sam with a plush puppy clutched to her chest. "Daddy? Where's Mommy?" she asked. "Mommy had to leave for work early this morning, sweetie. How would you feel about visiting Grandpa Jack and Grandma Brenda?" She thought for a moment and said, "Okay, but can I have breakfast first?" "Sure, honey. We'll both have breakfast." We ate and got dressed quickly. I loaded Sam into the car and drove to Jack and Brenda's house. They met us at the door, hugging each other tightly. Brenda was pale and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Ken, what's going on? Donna can't be in jail, can she?" Brenda asked. "I don't know what's going on, Brenda. All I know is she wasn't with the person she said she was going out with last night, and the babysitter said it wasn't the first time." Jack sat Sam down and told her, "Sam, I think there's a donut with sprinkles on the kitchen table for you. Why don't you go and have a look?" "Okay, Grandpa," Sam said, and trotted off to the kitchen. Jack turned to me and asked, "Ken, did you and Donna have a problem?" I shook my head. "Not that I know of, Jack. Donna has been acting a little strange and tired lately, but we talked about it, and she said she was just exhausted from our schedule. Why didn't she say anything to you?" Brenda and Jack looked at each other. Jack said, "Ken, we haven't seen her or even talked to her much in the last month. She hasn't called us, and if we called her, she said she was too busy to talk. It's really frustrating that she hasn't brought Sam over once in all that time. That's not like her." I nodded slowly. "Let me drive down there and find out what happened. I'll call you or bring her here." I turned and walked out the door with Jack following behind me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Thanks, Ken. I'd go with you, but I'm afraid to leave Brenda alone. Her blood pressure is spiking, and I had a hard time getting her to stop crying after Donna called." "I understand, Jack. Just take care of both of them, and I'll be back as soon as I can." I got in the car and headed to the county jail, about 20 miles away. I had driven by it many times, but had never been inside. Luckily, there were several signs directing me to the visitor's entrance. Inside, there was a nearly empty waiting area with a front desk where several uniformed officers were working. On the counter hung a sign instructing visitors to check in. Next to it was a clipboard. As I reached for a pen, One of the officers looked up and asked, "May I help you?" I was a bit confused and didn't know what to say at first. Finally, I said, "I think you have my wife here. She called my father-in-law this morning. We don't know why." "What's her name?" she asked rudely. "Donna. Donna Colville." She opened a folder in front of her and flipped through some papers. Without looking at me, she said, "Yes, she's here." She turned to another officer and asked, "Who's handling yesterday's holdup at the Red Roof Inn?" "Detectives Williams and Prescott," the second officer replied. The first officer picked up the phone and dialed a number. She turned away, said something into the receiver, then hung up and turned back to me. "Have a seat. Detective Williams will come get you." I sat staring at the floor for about 10 minutes until a man in plain clothes came out from an armored door at the back of the building and looked at me. He seemed about 40, shorter than me, but stocky, with a competent look. He approached me and said, "I'm Detective Williams. Are you Donna Colville's husband?" "Yes, yes. Is she all right? What's going on? Why is she here?" "Let's go to my office," he said, pointing down the hallway. I followed him to a room labeled Detectives. We were the only ones in a room with 4 desks, chairs, and many file cabinets. He closed the door behind me, pointed to a chair next to one of the desks, and said, "Have a seat. Let me see your driver's license, please." I handed him my ID, and he opened a folder on his desk, comparing it to what looked like a photocopy of Donna's license. He nodded and gave my ID back. "Mr. Colville, I'm sorry to tell you that your wife was arrested last night during a drug bust at the Red Roof Inn on Forest Road." I tried to act shocked and confused. "What? No, there must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, Mr. Colville. Following a tip about a drug deal, the Tri-County Drug Task Force raided a hotel room. They seized a large amount of illegal items and 2 weapons from the room and 2 cars. All 4 people in the room, including your wife, were arrested." I leaned back in my chair, looking stunned. Detective Williams watched me for a while, then said, "I can tell you what the officers observed and what they will testify to. Do you want to know? It might be upsetting." I stared at him for a moment, then nodded. "Yes." Upon entering the room, officers saw 2 men and 2 women. Drugs were openly visible. One man resisted arrest and assaulted an officer. He was subdued, and all 4 were brought here. I bent over in my chair, covered my eyes, and whispered, "No, no, no. This can't be happening. Mr. Colville, I need to ask you some questions," he said. I looked up at him over my fingertips, surprised to find real tears in my eyes. The shock and confusion from learning about Donna's betrayal came flooding back. "You can't be forced to testify against your wife, but maybe you can add something to what we know," he continued. I shook my head. "I don't understand it. We have a 4-year-old daughter. How could she do this?" Tears ran down my face. "You didn't know your wife was involved with drugs or had a drug problem?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, we never had a problem with drugs. The only time we tried marijuana was over 4 years ago. She didn't like it, and we never did it again." I hesitated, then added, "Wait, I remember something. About 6 or 7 months ago, she was nauseous and vomiting after being out with an old neighbor named Connie. She admitted smoking a joint with her that night. We had a big fight about it, and she promised never to go out with her again." The detective's eyes widened when I mentioned Connie's name. "Mr. Colville, your wife is going to need a lawyer. The court hearing will be Monday morning from 10 to 11. If she doesn't have an attorney, one will be appointed to her. Bail will be set at the arraignment." I pulled out a handkerchief and wiped my eyes. I nodded. "Can I get a copy of the arrest report and the charges?" He nodded. "Yes, I'll make you a copy. Can you tell me who she was arrested with?" "I can't officially, but a reporter was present at the scene, so it may appear in the paper soon. He may have the names of those involved, though they can't be released until charges are filed." He took the folder and left the room. A couple of minutes later, he returned and handed me some copies. I started reading until I got to the list of charges and stopped. I looked at him, shocked. "Is this right? Can it be right?" He nodded. "As far as we know, some charges can be dropped or added at arraignment or during pretrial. That will depend on the prosecutor." I went over the charges again. Felony drug possession with intent to deliver, possession of drug paraphernalia, and solicitation. I took a deep breath. "Solicitation? You mean prostitution, don't you?" "What the hell?" I stood up and headed for the door. I stopped and looked at him. "Are we done? I need to get out of here." He looked at me seriously. "Do you want to see her? Visiting hours start at 11? I snapped. "No, I don't want to see her. Not after what she did to me and our daughter." He nodded. "The arraignment will be in Judge Brown's court. My partner and I may have more questions. In the meantime, try to stay calm, okay?" I turned and walked out the door. As I drove back to my in-laws' house, I felt uneasy about telling them and how they would react. I walked in and saw Samantha, Jack, and Brenda sitting on the couch watching TV. Sam saw me and said, "Hi, Daddy. We're watching cartoons." "I can see that, sweetie. I need to talk to Grandpa for a minute and then we should go home, okay?" Sam nodded and went back to watching TV. I motioned for Jack to follow me to the kitchen. He stood up and followed. "What is it, Ken? Where's Donna? Why didn't you bring her home?" I didn't say anything, just handed him a copy of the arrest report. When he read it, he turned pale and collapsed into a chair. "This has to be wrong. It's not Donna," he said pleadingly. I shook my head. "It gets worse, Jack. The detective told me the officers at the scene will confirm it. They entered the room and saw 2 men and 2 women. There were drugs everywhere. One of the men resisted arrest and assaulted an officer. All 4 were arrested." Jack's mouth fell open, tears sprang from his eyes, and a groan escaped from deep within his chest. He covered his face and cried. I waited silently for him to recover. "Jack, Donna, and the others will be in court Monday morning at 10. Nothing can be done until then." Jack looked up at me. "Have you seen her? Have you seen Donna?" I shook my head grimly. "Jack, I don't want to see her right now, and I don't want to talk to her. I need to go home and think about all of this. I need to think about what's best for Samantha." Jack hung his head, covering his eyes with his hands, and his whole body shook. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "I'll leave it to you to tell Brenda. I'm sorry, Jack. I'm sorry for all of us." Jack just looked at me and nodded, tears in his eyes. He stood up and followed me into the living room. "Come on, Sam. Kiss your grandparents goodbye. It's time to go." I heard Brenda sigh and turned to see what was wrong. She was looking at Jack like he was a stranger. He seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. She walked over to him and looked into his eyes, and he just wrapped his arms around her and held her tightly. I picked Sam up and they followed us to the door. I turned to them before getting in the car. "I'll call if I hear anything." Jack only nodded and grabbed Brenda's hand. As we were pulling away, Sam looked out the window and asked, "Dad, why are Grandpa Jack and Grandma Brenda sad?" I thought about that question for a minute and wondered if it was time to start getting her ready. "Well, honey, we just found out that Mommy isn't feeling well, so she's going to stay somewhere to get better for a few days. That's why they're sad." Sam sat in her car seat in the back, and I watched her in the rearview mirror as she started to understand. "But Daddy, I don't want Mommy to leave. I want to see her," she said with tears in her eyes. "You will, honey, as soon as she gets better. But we have to be patient. Do you know what that means?" Sam began to cry quietly and repeated, "But I want my Mommy. I want my Daddy. Please." I bit my lip and desperately thought of ways to distract her. "Sam, do you want to go to the lake? To Grandpa and Grandma Orville's? We can stay the night." Sam stopped crying for a moment and thought. Still sniffling, she asked, "Can I go swimming?" "Sam, it's probably too cold for swimming, but you can swim in the lake if you want. It's not even the middle of May yet, and the lake is probably too cold." "Can I ride the tunnel?" "I'm sure Grandpa will take you on the pontoon if you want to," I assured her. Excited, she said, "Okay, let's go to Grandma and Grandpa's." When we got home, I told Sam to get clothes and toys to take with her, and I helped her pack. While she was doing that, I sat down at the phone and called up north. When Dad answered, I asked if he and Mom wanted some company since I wasn't working today and thought we could drive up. "Hell yeah. Your brother is coming over in the morning to help us launch the docks and boats, ours and Harvey's next door. We could use your help." I assured him we'd be there in a couple of hours and hung up. I packed my overnight bag and helped Sam pack hers. I smiled as she optimistically included a swimsuit, just in case. "Daddy," she said cheerfully. Sam was fast asleep in her car seat as we began the 130-mile trip. In the silence, I had plenty of time to think and prepare to break the news to Mom and Dad. They had always been close to Donna ever since the three of us returned from Germany, and since my parents had never had daughters, they cared for Donna and my brother's wife, Sandra, almost as much as they cared for their grandchildren. They probably took the news as hard as her own parents did. It was the middle of the afternoon when we pulled up to the house. Dad was fiddling in the garage, and Mom was raking pine needles from the trees surrounding the house. They both came over and greeted us as Sam jumped out of the car screaming, "Grandma! Grandma! Daddy!" They both hugged and kissed her until she finally couldn't stand it anymore and tore down the side of the house toward the lake and beach. They both turned to me, and Mom asked accusingly, "Where's Donna?" I grabbed my suitcases and said grimly, "Let's go inside and I'll tell you all about it." We sat on the front porch where we could watch Sam throw rocks into the water and poke them in the sand. I told them everything that had happened since the evening, about going home to the babysitter, about Jack's call in the morning, and about going to the jail and listening to the detective. Mom and Dad were shocked, and if I wasn't their son, I think Dad would have called me an outright liar. Finally, I pulled the arrest report out of my bag and showed it to them. Mom read it with tears in her eyes. "Ken, this can't be true. You don't believe it, do you? Donna would never do that," Dad said. "It's not like Donna. Are they sure that's what happened?" I nodded. The detective seemed sure, and he even said there was a reporter present during the arrest. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. How could she do that? Jack and Brenda must be absolutely devastated," Mom said. She stood up, crying, and ran into the house. We sat in silence for about 10 minutes until Mom came back, wiping her eyes with a tissue. She suggested that Sam go up and help her with dinner and that Dad and I go for a walk. She knew that I always talked to Dad when I had a problem or needed to make a decision. I knew he would tell her everything later, but that's what we always did. I called to Sam, and Dad and I walked out into the backyard and down the dirt road. He asked me what I was thinking. I told him that if all of this was true, and it looked like it was, then I couldn't trust Donna anymore. And I certainly couldn't trust her to be there for Sam. And what she did hurt me so badly that I couldn't imagine getting over it. The only way out was divorce, and I thought it would be best if I put some distance between us and her. I told him that I had graduated a semester early and was being handed my diploma. He smiled warmly and congratulated me. I just nodded and said that all things considered, it was a bittersweet accomplishment. Anyway, I had sent out over 100 resumes and applications all over the state. It was likely that I would be able to find a job away from our hometown. I figured the farther away, the better. We talked about other things for a while. Their house in Florida, the possibility of an addition to the house here on the lake, my brother and his family. Finally, he told me that he and Mom had decided to give up their apartment in the city. It was too expensive, and they couldn't afford to keep both the house on the lake and the apartment. They also had a place in a retirement park in Florida. I nodded. My brother and I often wondered why they even tried to manage all three places. As our walk ended at the house, Dad stopped and said, "Whatever you decide to do about Donna, make sure you do it for the right reasons. I know you loved her. Maybe you still do. You know we don't believe in divorce unless it's a last resort. But your mom and I will support you. Is there anything we can do to help you and Samantha?" When he said that, I started to cry again. "Thank you, Dad. Could you and Mom keep Sam for me this week? I have a lot to take care of, and I need to keep working until I find another job." "Sure, son. I'll talk to your mom. I'm sure she'll be happy to have Sam around." We spent the rest of the evening eating dinner, visiting, and playing games with Sam. We avoided talking about Donna, and by the time Sam went to bed, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept much the night before and was emotionally drained. I headed to bed, knowing we had to start work at 9 the next morning. At 8, I was already up and eating breakfast when Harvey stopped by. Harvey was in his 70s and had owned the cottage next door for over 30 years. His wife had passed away a couple of years ago. He now divided his time between the cottage and the homes of his 3 married children. Only one of his children, his oldest son, still lived in Michigan, and he had 2 college-age children. Until a couple of years ago, the 2 grandchildren, a girl and a boy, could be seen here almost every weekend. They were out with friends, swimming, water skiing, and having a great time. I called them kids, but really they were only 5 or 6 years younger than Donna and me. But as they got more involved with college, they stopped coming to the lake. Harvey was a friendly old guy. He and his wife had been close to Mom and Dad for years. He sat down with a cup of coffee, and we chatted for a while. Dad and Mom bragged about me getting my engineering degree from Michigan State University. He congratulated me and then informed me that his granddaughter, Casey, was graduating from Grand Valley next week. Can you believe it? She's getting a degree in kinesiology. I can hardly pronounce that word, much less write it, he laughed. Yeah, she wants to spend some time here this summer while she looks for a job. She hasn't been here much the last couple of years, and she misses the lake. She's afraid that when she starts working, she won't have the chance to come back for a long time. About this time, my brother John showed up with his daughter Elaine, who was a year older than Sam. Sandra stayed home with the younger one, as John was only coming for the day. Elaine happily went to Sam's room to get her up. Dad, John, Harvey, and I set to work. Once the four of us got to work, the job went quickly. By lunchtime, we had the docks built. After a short break, we borrowed a pontoon trailer from a neighbor down the road and launched both pontoons, Dad's and Harvey's. Finally, we put Harvey's speedboat and Dad's fishing boat in. Sam and Elaine couldn't wait to get on the pontoon at the end of the day. We loaded everyone onto the pontoon and took a short ride around our part of the lake. I was pleasantly exhausted, but I managed to put Donna out of my mind for most of the day. At one point, I did have to explain to John what was going on. After he got over the initial shock, we agreed to meet for lunch later in the week and talk more. I suggested that Sam stay at the lake with her grandparents. At first, she was worried about missing preschool, but I assured her that I would call the school and they wouldn't mind if she missed a week. After a quick dinner, I packed up my things and said goodbye to everyone. I hugged and kissed Sam and told her to be good for her grandparents. I assured her that I would call her every day and that Grandpa would bring her home on Friday. As I drove home, I reflected on how calm I felt for the first time in weeks. Mentally, I was relieved. With Sam taken care of, I could focus on resolving the situation. I arrived home at dusk. I gathered the Saturday mail and Sunday paper from the porch and put them on the kitchen table. I glanced at the answering machine and saw the message light blinking. There were 3 messages. Trevor had called and wanted to know how I was doing. Jack called and asked me to call him back. The 3rd call was from Donna. When I realized whose barely audible voice it was, my heart raced. She said weakly, "Ken? Ken, where are you?" I could hear her trying not to cry, and her voice shook. "Ken, please, please take me away from here. This is a mistake. I don't know what you think, but it's not true. Dad barely talks to me, and Mom won't come to the phone. I don't know who else to call. Please." She started to cry openly. Then the call cut off. I froze for a moment, trying to remember the anger and hatred I felt just last Friday night. Mostly, I just felt sad and bitter. I picked up the phone and called Jack. When he answered, I said, "Jack, it's Ken. How's Brenda?" In a tired voice, he said, "Ken, I tried to call you, but you weren't home." "I know. I decided to take Sam to the lake to see Mom and Dad. I just got back. They're going to keep Sam for the week." "Brenda's in the hospital, Ken. I took her to the ER yesterday after I told her everything you told me. Her blood pressure went dangerously high. She's probably having an emotional breakdown, too. The doctor said she needs to be kept under sedation and observation for a couple of days." "Damn it. I'm sorry, Jack. I hope she's going to be okay." "Me too, Ken. But I wanted to tell you that Donna called again early this morning. I could barely talk to her. I didn't know what to say. She did that to her mother, and now I can't forgive her for it. In the end, I just hung up the phone." "Yeah, I know, Jack. She left a message on our answering machine begging me to come and get her out of there. Claimed it was all a mistake." I hesitated for a moment. "I'm planning on going to the arraignment tomorrow. How about you?" "I think I need to go back to the hospital in the morning. If Brenda sees me, it will help calm her down." "Okay, I'll call you tomorrow afternoon or stop by the hospital before I leave for work and let you know what's going on. Tell Brenda I said hi, okay?" "I will. Thanks, Ken." Hanging up the phone, I quickly went through the mail. There were several envelopes from the engineering firms I had applied to. I opened them and flipped through the letters. One said they had no current openings but would keep my resume on file. The other said to contact the employment agency they use to fill vacancies when they came up. No good, I thought. I turned on the TV and opened the Sunday paper. I sleepily flipped through the pages, half-heartedly browsing the news. Suddenly, I woke up. At the bottom of the front page of the Metro section was an article headlined, "Major Drug Raid on the East Side." It took up several columns and continued on the inside page. There were 2 photos on the inside page. One showed the back half of a Lincoln Town car with the trunk open, with 2 officers rummaging around in it. In the background, you could see the open door of a hotel room and one of the beds with linens scattered on it. Another picture showed a handcuffed man being put into a police car. From the profile and the fact that he was walking by himself, I realized it was James. The article said that 2 suspects, a man and a woman, were taken into custody and that the state attorney's office was very interested in the fact that one of the male suspects was a state corrections officer. A large amount of drugs were seized and cars belonging to the 2 suspects, a gun and a knife, were also found in the room. The suspects were expected to be arraigned Monday, and underneath the photos, in addition to the journalist's byline, was Dennis Thompson's byline. I paused, contemplating it. I knew from previous interactions with him that although he worked for the paper, he had an office in the newspaper building. I thought it would be helpful to visit him first thing the next day. The last thing I did before going to bed was to call Trevor back. When he answered, I quickly brought him up to speed and told him about everything that had happened over the weekend. We talked a bit about how it all affected her parents and my parents. I told him that I planned to be at work all week since Sam would be taken care of. I was about to hang up when he said he had some news too. He had received a letter from General Motors saying that his apprenticeship program would begin in 2 weeks. I congratulated him and told him that no one deserved it more. I meant it. Trevor was a good guy, hard-working and smart. Too smart to spend his life on an assembly line. The next morning, I was up early. By 8, I was on the phone with the office of the divorce attorney I had called the previous week. I was lucky and got an appointment for the afternoon. By 8:30, I was standing outside Dennis Thompson's office in the newspaper building and knocked on his door. He opened the door and said, without any warmth, "Yes, what do you need?" He was a couple of years younger than me, tall and thin. His appearance was somewhat unkempt, as if he didn't care much for his looks. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Ken Colville. I'd like to talk to you about the pictures you published in Sunday's paper about the drug bust." "Yes, come in. Have we met before? You look familiar to me." Trying to speak a little louder than usual, I replied, "I don't think so." "Okay, so what are you interested in?" "My wife is Donna Colville. She was one of the women arrested at that motel." That statement got his undivided attention. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "Yeah, I'm sure you are. I'm filing for divorce. Judging from the pictures in the paper and the detective's comment, I assume you have other pictures that my divorce attorney might want to see." "Yes, there are other pictures. But why should I provide them to you?" I decided to take the direct approach and see what he would do. "Look, Mr. Thompson, I'll pay you $500 for any photos you have, and I'll sign an agreement that they are for my personal use in any lawsuit I may be involved in and will not be published anywhere." He thought for a moment. "Like I said, why should I provide them to you? Wouldn't you rather have my attorney call you and bring the pictures to the divorce hearing? That way you'll get the money and won't have to worry." He stared at me for a moment, then laughed. "Yeah, you're probably right." He reached for the stack of manila envelopes on the corner of the desk and started going through them. Finally, he found the one he was looking for and held it out to me across the table. Then he reached into the file drawer under the desk and pulled out a couple of printed sheets. "There are 2 sets of 5x7 prints here. I must warn you that some of them are quite graphic. Look through them and see if they're what you're looking for while I fill out the standard contract forms. Oh, and you can write me a check for $550. $500 for the rights to the photographs and $50 for the prints. You give me back the prints and I'll give you back the $50. Deal?" I snorted, knowing the prints would never be returned. I carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photos, quickly flipping through them. I felt my throat constrict and suddenly felt dizzy. Yes, this is what I need. And I recognized the other woman, I said in almost a whisper, tucking them back into the envelope. He stopped writing for a moment and looked at me intently. "You didn't know anything about this, did you? Are the kids involved too?" I didn't answer, just nodded. He shook his head. I moonlight as a private investigator sometimes. It's amazing how painful it can be when a man or woman finds out their spouse isn't who they say they are. With shaky hands, I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a check. We both signed the contracts, a copy for each of us, and I handed him the money. Taking the check, he said, "Thanks. I couldn't use most of these pictures anyway. They're too graphic and too likely to get me sued if I did." I nodded. "I can offer you a few more cases. Another woman has 2 ex-husbands who would also like custody of their children. I'll let them know about it, and I bet they'd be willing to pay you for copies too." As I was about to leave, he stood up and held out his hand and one of his business cards to me. "I wish you luck with your divorce. With these pictures, there should be no custody issues." Without another word, I turned and walked out. I arrived at the courthouse well before 10. I wandered around until I found Judge Brown's courtroom. About a dozen people were already waiting there, and I found a seat in the back of the hall. The benches gradually filled up with relatives and friends of the defendants, lawyers, and a few police officers. I recognized Detective Williams, who stood at the door, and another man who entered alone and sat down by the aisle. I puzzled over it for a long time, until it came to me that this was Connie's first husband. I had seen him a couple of times a few years ago when we lived next door to her. I made a mental note to try to catch him before he left. The judge and bailiff came in and announced the first case. A steady stream of prisoners in orange jumpsuits under escort appeared before the judge one by one to hear the charges and plead guilty. Some prisoners were handcuffed, some were not. The judge would review the arrest file and read the prosecutor's recommendations. He would then set bail and a court date, after which the prisoners would be escorted out just as quickly. Then the next group was brought in. The third group of inmates included Donna, Connie, Curtis, and James. Curtis and James were handcuffed. Curtis was limping with a bandage on his nose, looking angry and belligerent. James stared at the floor, sullen and depressed. Donna and Connie looked awful, hair unkempt, no makeup, eyes red and puffy, and wrinkles on their faces from stress. They were both looking around as if hoping to find someone they knew. I tried to stay behind the person ahead of me so she wouldn't notice me. I saw her shoulders slump as she realized she was alone. Curtis was called in first. The charges read out included all the drug-related counts, as well as resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. The lawyer standing next to him pleaded not guilty, and the judge set bail at $100,000 and set a date for next month. James was called in next, and the charges were read to him, including all the drug charges and another charge I didn't quite catch. A man stood up and introduced himself as the district attorney. He and James's attorney approached the bench. After a few words with the judge, both attorneys stepped back. The defense attorney pleaded not guilty. The judge set bail at $200,000 and said a trial date would be set later. I gathered from the murmurs that the bail amount was unusual. Connie was called in next. The usual drug charges were read to her, and an incitement charge was added. Connie pleaded not guilty, and bail was set at $25,000. Donna was called in next. When she stood up to plead not guilty, tears streamed down her face. Her attorney had to hold her hand to keep her upright because she was shaking so badly. The same charges were read again, including solicitation. Her lawyer pleaded not guilty, and her bail was set at $25,000, the same as Connie's. The 4 of them were led away, and Donna never looked up again. I stood up and headed down the aisle as the next group was led into the hall. I remembered Connie's ex-husband's name was Mark. I called out to him as he walked out the door. He stopped and turned around. "You probably don't remember me. I'm Ken Colville, Donna's husband." Yeah, I think I remember. It's a hell of a thing, isn't it?" he said. I just shook my head in agreement. "I have an appointment with a divorce lawyer this afternoon, but I wanted to catch you. I remember a while back you tried to get custody of your son, right?" "Yes, but never got anywhere in court. But I think this will help," he said with a humorless smile. "I think so. Here's the business card of the photographer who took the bust pictures. They'll make your custody dispute a win. It'll cost you a few bucks, but it'll be worth it. You might want to let Connie's other ex know about it, too." "The pictures are that bad, aren't they? Or maybe I should say good." "Yes, I'll let him know, thanks." As I turned to leave, Detective Williams touched my arm. "Mr. Colville," he said. I stopped and looked at him. "Oh, hi. How are you?" "Do you have a few minutes to talk to me and my partner?" he asked politely, but I got the impression that the request was more of a directive. Internally, I sighed and thought I could get this over with. "Sure, let's go to one of the interrogation rooms," I said, nodding and following him into the sheriff's building. He introduced me to his partner, and we sat down at a table with a stack of folders on it. He opened one and then said, "I have a couple of questions to help our investigation. You have the right to have an attorney present if you wish." "Well, I don't have one yet, but I'm meeting with a divorce attorney this afternoon. Is there some reason I need one?" "You're filing for divorce?" "Hell yes. I met with the photographer this morning. He showed me the rest of the pictures. He even sold me a set. Can you live with that?" I said bitterly. He looked at me sympathetically, but ignored my question. "Tell you what, if you feel uncomfortable answering questions, tell me and we'll stop until you can get a lawyer. Is that okay with you?" "Yes, of course." I tried not to worry. I'd been preparing for this, knowing that at some point someone would want me to tell them what I knew. "Do you know Connie Wilkerson?" "Yes. We were neighbors for a while. I haven't seen her since we moved out of that townhouse complex a couple of years ago." "Did you know your wife was seeing her regularly?" "No. I told you on Saturday that I knew she saw her that one time. She told me she wouldn't see her again. It's obvious now that she lied to me." "I take it you weren't friends with Connie." I snorted. "You're right, she's a troublemaker. But apparently my wife is too. So they're in good company." I then proceeded to tell him the story of our friends, John and Tracy, and Connie's involvement in the destruction of their marriage. How John caught her in bed with another man after moving in with her. I also told him how she had neglected her children and used them against her ex-husbands. He nodded and then asked, "Have you ever heard of Curtis Halleck or James Martin until this morning's court hearing?" "No. But as it turns out, I have a couple of good pictures of them," I said ironically. "Donna never mentioned them." "No. What was she going to say?" "I thought you might be interested to know that I was having fun with a man named Curtis Halleck," I replied sarcastically. He ignored my comment and asked, "Are you familiar with a nightclub called the Black and Tan?" "Of course. Everyone around here knows the Black and Tan. Is that where they met up?" He shrugged. "We think so. We have a witness who says they've been there several times in the last month." I shook my head in bewilderment. "I know I asked you on Saturday, but I have to ask again. Did you know your wife was involved with drugs?" "No, sir. Not the slightest idea." I guess that makes me kind of stupid, doesn't it? We had a pretty hectic schedule last semester. I was attending MSU almost full-time to get my degree and working nights, 6 days a week at an assembly plant. Donna was working 30 hours a week at the hospital and taking care of our 4-year-old. After the holidays, we only spent time together on Saturdays and Sundays. No changes in behavior or attendance problems at work? I haven't heard anything about her work, but I've noticed she's been out of sorts the last couple of months. Her parents have noticed it too. Now I know why, but when I asked her about it, she said the schedule was stressing her out, but she could handle it. Okay, I think that's all the questions for today. Here's my business card in case you remember anything. And thank you for your cooperation. Can I ask you a question about bail? Someone will have to bail her out. How does that work? He handed me a list of bail bondsmen in the area and explained that bail could be posted for 10% of the bail amount in cash. Once the bail was posted at the jail, she would be released in about an hour. As I drove away, I thought the interview had gone very well and felt relieved. I decided to see Jack and Brenda before meeting with the lawyer. When I arrived at the hospital, I made my way to Brenda's room. She was asleep, and Jack was sitting next to the bed. He stood up, put his fingers to his lips, and walked to the door. We went outside, and I asked, "How is she?" "Good. Her blood pressure's back to normal. They're going to discharge her in the morning. The doctor will keep her on antidepressants for a while." "How did it go in court?" "The charges were read. Her attorney pleaded not guilty. Bail was set at $25,000. It only lasted 10 minutes. She called again early this morning. She almost became hysterical when I told her mother was in the hospital. She said she misses you and Sam and doesn't understand why you don't call her back or come to see her. She asked if anyone was coming to the court hearing. I said I had to be at the hospital, but someone would probably come. She begged for someone to get her out of there. I told her we'd see what we could do. Yeah, she looked pretty bad this morning. I said without any sympathy. Jack looked at me sadly. What are you going to do, Ken? Are you going to bail her out? I looked Jack in the eye and said, Jack, I can't let her anywhere near Sam or me right now. I have an appointment with an attorney this afternoon to see what my options are. Is it really that bad, Ken? Don't you have any doubts left? Jack asked, annoyed. Did you see the article in the Sunday paper? He nodded. I went to the photographer this morning. There are other pictures. Candid pictures. Photos that, as Donna's father, I hope you never have to see. Photos that, as her husband, I can never get out of my mind. There is no question of cheating. None, I said firmly. Jack wiped his eyes and said, Okay, Ken, I understand. The bail is $2,500. If you need help, I'll give it to you. As for where she goes when she gets out, I don't really care. Maybe she'll move in with Connie. The other woman involved in all this? I think she'll have her kids taken away soon, so she'll have a place to go. No. I'll talk to Brenda when she wakes up. I'm sure no matter how hard it is for her, she'll still want Donna to move in with us. One thing about being a parent, even if you disagree with or are appalled by their behavior, even of an adult child, you still have to love and support them. He said this with sadness. When we looked at each other, I was surprised that we both had tears in our eyes. I want you to know, Jack, you and Brenda can see Samantha anytime you want. I don't want it to change your relationship with her. And ours, too. I've always thought a lot of you and Brenda. He nodded, and we hugged as he quickly turned and walked back to the hospital room. I could hear him trying to hold back sobs. I slowly walked away, shaking my head at how much suffering Donna had caused. My meeting with the lawyer in the afternoon went as I expected. I explained the circumstances, provided him with a copy of the arrest report and photos. I told him that my first priority was to get custody of Samantha, and I wanted to keep Donna away from Sam for as long as possible. I didn't care about the settlement. The lawyer said he could file divorce papers the next morning on the grounds of adultery and also seek an injunction against Donna as an unfit parent who was a danger to the child. He felt there should be no problem with the arrest and photos. I asked him to call me when the papers were ready so I could pick them up and give them to Donna myself. When I got home late that night, the phone rang. It was Mary. Ken, it's Mary. Donna didn't show up for work today and hasn't called. What's wrong? Donna's in jail, Mary, I said without emotion. What? She said incredulously. You didn't mishear, Mary. She's in the Eaton County Jail. What? Why? Did you see the Sunday paper about the drug bust at the Red Roof Inn Friday night? I didn't read it, but I heard something about it. She was one of the 4 arrested that night. I heard Mary give a shocked sigh. So I don't think she'll be at work for a while. But that can't be true. What are you going to do? I'm going to do what I have to do. I'm sure she'll contact the hospital as soon as she's released on bail. Ken, I'm so sorry. Yeah, me too. I hung up the phone. That evening, I went to work as usual. Trevor and I talked for a while and caught up. When I got home from work, I wandered around the house thinking about how much had changed in just 3 days. For the first time since Thursday night, I was sleeping in my own bed alone and realized I needed to get used to it. This was how it was supposed to be. I'd been married for almost 5 years and hadn't slept apart from Donna since I left the Army. On Tuesday, I got up and started on my to-do list. I got Donna's luggage and a few boxes out of the basement and started packing her things, all her clothes, shoes, and toiletries. I packed them and put them in the trunk of her car. All her things on hangers I pulled out of the closet and spread them out in the back seat. Just as I was finishing up, the phone rang. When I answered it, it was a reporter from the local TV station asking if Donna Colville lived here. I replied that she didn't and hung up. The phone rang again, and it was the same man. He insisted this was the number of Donna Colville who had been arrested the previous Friday night. I asked how he knew that, and he said it was in today's paper. I told him there was no one here by that name and hung up again. I hadn't picked up the newspaper from the porch yet this morning, so I figured I'd better find out what was in store for me. On page 2 was a continuation of the arrest story, including sketches of the arrestees. The article detailed the arraignment and emphasized the connection between Curtis and James and the drug problem at the Ionia jail. I almost dropped the paper when I read that the street value of the drugs seized totaled over $100,000. I thought, damn, Curtis must have loaded his Lincoln with some serious weight. I decided to add changing my phone number to my to-do list today, as my lawyer advised. I grabbed my checkbook and savings books and headed to our bank branch. I opened a separate individual checking account for myself and transferred half of the money from our joint accounts into it. I then withdrew my name from the joint accounts. On the way home, I stopped by the post office and applied to change Donna's address to her parents' address. I also stopped by the phone company office and filled out an application for a new phone number in my name only. When I got home, the phone was already ringing, and the answering machine message queue was full. I quickly went through them. Most of them were from reporters, except for 3. One was from the hospital asking me to call back to check on Donna's condition. The second was from Jack, who informed me that Brenda had been released from the hospital and they were already home. The last was from an attorney who said he was representing Donna and wanted to talk to me about her case. I called Jack and asked if everything was okay. When he assured me that everything was fine, I told him I wanted to drive Donna's car with her belongings and hoped he could give me a ride home. Fortunately, he agreed, and that would give us a chance to talk. I told him I would be there soon. I made a few more calls, canceling joint credit cards and making new ones in my name only. I called the landlord to talk about getting Donna off the lease and made an appointment for later in the week. By the time I got to my in-laws' house, it was the middle of the afternoon. The 3 of us hugged, and Brenda put her head on my chest and cried. I patted her shoulder and told her I felt the same way. Jack and I unloaded Donna's things and stacked them in the spare room. I gave him her mail and bank accounts and asked him to hold them for her. As we were driving back to my house, I said, "I'm filing for divorce, Jack." "I can't live like this anymore," I said. "Yeah, I realized that when you left yesterday," he said sadly. "I called the bail bondsman today. I have an appointment to pick up the bail tomorrow at 11. Jack, I wish I could go with you to the jail to pick her up. It's my responsibility to tell her what's going to happen. I don't want her to have any doubts left. And I don't want you to have to deal with that," I said firmly. "Sure, Ken. I think it's going to be a hell of a day for all of us," he sighed. We drove the rest of the way in silence, each immersed in our own thoughts. As we got out of the car, I told him I planned to meet him around noon at the jail, and he agreed. I called the attorney's office and arranged to pick up the divorce papers the next day. I then called up north to talk to Sam and my parents. I brought my father up to speed and asked how Sam was doing. He said she was having a great time, but when it came time to go to bed, she missed me and Mom. Well, then put her on the phone. I miss her too. "Daddy, is that you? Hi, Sam, are you having fun? Grandma and Daddy and Grandma and Mommy took me to ride the tunnel again. That's great, kiddo. Daddy, is Mommy there? Can I talk to her?" "Mommy's not here, Sam, but she's feeling better." "I miss Mommy. Can you get her to call me on the phone so I can tell her about the tunnel ride and everything?" "Sure, Sam," I said, my heart breaking. We talked for a few more minutes, then she decided she needed to go back to the dock to see what Grandpa was doing. As I hung up the phone, I shuddered to think of what would happen when she realized she wouldn't see her mother for a long time. At work, I encountered another unpleasantness. The story in the newspaper had gotten a lot of publicity, and I was bombarded with questions from friends and co-workers. When it was finally lunchtime, I told Trev I couldn't take it anymore. He nodded and said, "Let's go to the foreman." I explained the situation, and the foreman said it was okay to take the rest of the shift off. I thanked him, and Trev walked me to the gate. "You know, Trev, there's one thing I don't understand. The paper said the street value of the drugs they found was over 100 grand. Where did that come from?" He laughed. "You know, sometimes the strangest things happen. From what I heard on the street, they were really doing drugs that night." Looking around, I asked, "Are there any rumors about what really happened that night?" "No. Neither James nor Curtis are out on bail yet. But I've heard that Curtis thinks his soon-to-be ex-wife may have had something to do with it." I left him at the gate and told him I'd probably see him tomorrow. As I sat at home and stupidly watched TV, my thoughts continued to run in circles. I knew that the next day I would have to see Donna, probably for the last time. The woman I loved more than anyone in the world. The person I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. Now, I hated her for ruining that future and leaving all of our lives in ruins. I couldn't forgive her for the pain she had caused our daughter, pain that might change her life forever. And when I thought about Samantha, doubt crept into my head. Had I done the right thing? Could I have stepped back from the brink and tried to hold the situation together for Sam's sake? Would years of suffering have been better for me than the pain we both had to endure now? Eventually, I got up, found a couple of sleeping pills, swallowed them, and went to bed. The next morning, I went to the lawyer's office to pick up the papers. He talked to me for a few minutes to explain some of the details. He said that when the judge saw the pictures, he wouldn't hesitate to sign the restraining order, but he wanted to warn me that I couldn't keep Donna away from our daughter forever. At some point, unless she completely broke down, the court would eventually allow her back into Samantha's life. I nodded and said I would accept that when the time came. I thanked him, and he said he would contact me as soon as he knew the court date. I pulled up to the jail just before noon. Jack and Brenda were already sitting in the waiting room waiting for me. Jack presented his bond to one of the officers, who looked it over and said it would take about an hour to process. He said that Donna would be brought to interview room C if we wanted to wait for her there. Jack, Brenda, I'd like to talk to Donna alone. When I'm done, you can take her home. Is that okay with you? Jack and Brenda looked at each other sadly. Sure, Ken. We'll wait here, said Jack. The officer led me through the security doors, down the hallway, and into the interrogation room. We'll bring her downstairs once she's changed, he said. I just nodded and put my papers on the table. I paced around the room, thinking about what I should say to her. I was startled by the sudden opening of the door. I turned around and saw Donna standing there, looking at me. She looked terrible. Her hair was in a ponytail and she had no makeup on. She looked haggard and was wearing clothes I had never seen before. Tight, low-cut blouse, mini skirt, and high heels. When she realized it was me in the room, she screamed, Ken! Ken, you've come! Oh God, please take me home! Staggering, she walked over to me, threw herself into my arms, and began sobbing uncontrollably. I stood there unmoving, preparing myself for what I had to do. I gently lowered her arms from my neck and said, Hold on, Donna, sit down, we need to talk. She looked up at me through her tears, blinking and confused, as I pushed her into a chair and sat across from her. But Ken, can't we just go home? She pleaded, grabbing my hands. Donna, don't you have something to tell me about why you're here? I said calmly. Ken, please. I don't know how the drugs ended up in my purse or in my car. You have to believe me, she cried. Maybe I do, Donna, but don't you have anything to say about who you were with and what you were doing in that motel room? I said slowly. Donna turned even paler, pulled her hands out of mine, wrapped her arms around herself, and trembled. Ken, I don't know what they told you, but it's not true. It's all a mistake. Please, it was just a mistake, she whispered. Donna, don't lie to me. I know about Connie, James, Curtis, and the black and tan, I said quietly. Donna began to shake and cry. Please, Ken, just take me home. It's a lie. It's all a lie. Really, Donna? Really? I reached into the manila envelope I had with me, pulled out 4 5x7 photos from the dozen I had bought, and placed them in front of her one by one. The photographs were arranged in the order they were taken. The first one showed officers breaking down the door. The last picture showed Curtis lying face down on the ground with 2 officers holding him down and handcuffing him. James stood with his hands in the air. Connie and Donna stood against the far wall, holding their hands in front of their faces. Donna looked at the pictures, then at me, and turned away. Oh my God! Oh my God! Get them away! Get them away! She screamed hysterically and cried. At that moment, the door opened and an officer peeked into the room. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, officer. I'm almost done, I said grimly. He gave Donna a hard look, then closed the door while I waited patiently for Donna's crying to subside into violent, shuddering sobs. I gathered up the pictures and put them away. Finally, she turned to me again with tears streaming down her face and a lost, hunted look. After seeing the pictures again, I had no sympathy for her. Please, please, I want to go home. I want to go home, she pleaded. Yes, Donna, you're going home, but not to my house. You don't live there anymore. Your mom and dad are here, and they'll take you to their house. My biggest regret is that they'll have to see the horror you've turned into." She looked at me, shocked. I reached into the envelope and pulled out some papers. I placed the first packet in front of her. "This is a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Appropriate, don't you think?" I placed the second packet of papers in front of her. "And this is a restraining order requiring you to stay away from me, our home, and Samantha. I'm told the judge couldn't sign it fast enough when he saw your artistic photo shoot," I said bitterly. Donna looked at me in utter bewilderment. She tried to say something, but it came out completely unintelligible. I got up to leave before she finally spoke. She desperately reached out to stop me. "Oh my God, Ken, I love you, I really do. Please don't do this. Please don't take Samantha away from me," she sobbed. I angrily shook off her hands. "Damn you, Donna. It's always about you, isn't it?" I took a deep breath. "What about me, Donna? I loved you with everything I had. Didn't that mean anything to you? What about Sam? Didn't her love mean anything to you? You broke both our hearts, and now I have to explain to a precious 4-year-old girl who loves you with all her heart and soul why she can't see her mommy?" When I finished speaking, tears were streaming down my cheeks. "And you know what, Donna? The only thing I want to know is why. Why did you do that? But seeing you like this, I don't think you can tell me why, can you?" Donna sank down in her chair, folded her hands in front of her face, and sobbed. I just stood there for the longest time, tears dripping uncontrollably onto my shirt. Finally, I said brokenly, "You know what the saddest thing is? The saddest part is that the house in the country we were going to build together and the little brother we were going to give Samantha are now just dreams." I paused, and Donna just stared at me with empty eyes, stunned. "That's never going to happen," I said quietly. I turned and walked out the door and down the hall. Jack and Brenda were standing at the end of the hallway, waiting when they saw my face and heard Donna's heartbreaking sobs behind me. Tears came to their eyes and ran down their faces. We hugged in silence, and I turned and walked out the door to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives. Next part, I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, holding my newborn son in my arms. I stared in wonder at his dark hair, wrinkled face, and the tiny fists he clutched next to his tightly closed eyes. I looked in awe at my exhausted wife, holding the same bundle in her arms, even as tired as she was. She looked at me with pride and love. Samantha sat as close as she could on the other side of her and smiled from ear to ear, smiling so hard I thought her face was about to crack. "Sam, have you ever seen anything so beautiful in your life?" I asked in surprise. Sam giggled and replied, "Oh, Daddy, Mommy, my wish came true twice." I sat and admired my amazing family. My thoughts returned to how different my future seemed just 18 months ago. I walked out of the county jail that May Day, mentally and emotionally exhausted, but determined to start my life over that week. The responses to my job applications turned into a flood. Out of that flood, perhaps a dozen invited me to call back and schedule an interview. I started scheduling appointments as quickly as I could. Out of that handful, I received 3 job offers. The one I enjoyed the most was a job with the County Road Commission in the Traverse City area. The man I interviewed with, Don Fineout, was a Vietnam veteran and former combat engineer. We had a lot in common, and I thought we would really get along. The money wasn't as good as other offers, but it was 150 miles from home and only 30 miles from Mom and Dad's house on the lake. After the interview and on the way back home, I stopped to talk to Mom and Dad and spend the night. Sam was still staying with them. It was better that way, given my traveling around looking for work and the fact that I was still working nights at the auto plant. As always, the first thing Sam did when she jumped into my arms was ask about her mom and when she would be able to see her again. "Hopefully soon, Sam. Mom is starting to feel better, and as soon as the doctor says she's okay, she'll come see you. I promise," I said guiltily. "I miss her, Daddy. Tell her for me, please," she said with tears in her eyes. "Of course, honey," I said, hugging her tightly. "And Grandma helped me make a get-well card for her. Will you give it to her, too?" said Sam as Mom looked at me sadly over her head. "Of course I will, Samantha. Now tell me about everything you did at the lake," I said, trying to distract her. She proceeded to tell me about going fishing with her grandfather and Harvey next door, helping her grandmother get the house ready for guests over Memorial Day weekend, and taking a speedboat ride with Harvey and Harvey's granddaughter, Casey. She talked about Harvey's granddaughter like she was her new best friend. Mom laughed and said that she and Casey had become very good friends. They were inseparable on those days when Casey wasn't busy looking for a job. Later, Mom told me that she felt like Sam was replacing Casey as her mother, but Casey didn't seem to mind. I thought about it and hoped Sam wasn't giving me any trouble. I hadn't seen Casey in years and didn't know how she felt about kids. That night at dinner, we discussed my job offer. I told Mom and Dad that I really liked the person I would be working for, and I thought the job would be interesting. The only thing I was confused about was finding a place to live and whether there would be any divorce or custody issues because of it. Dad looked at Mom and she smiled back at him and said, "I know what you're thinking and I think it's a great idea." I looked puzzled and Dad laughed. He said, "How about this? You and Sam move in with us, at least until we leave for Florida in the fall. That will give you time to get settled in the area and find something to buy or rent. And we'll get Samantha for the whole summer." "Are you sure?" I asked, hesitantly. "We have plenty of room. It only gets crowded on weekends when John and Sandra and the kids come to visit, and this way you won't have to worry about childcare when you start your new job," he said. "That sounds great, but I don't want us to be a burden to you," I said doubtfully. "Then who's a burden?" Mom said, smiling. "Not Sam. And if it makes you feel better, you can pay us to stay here. It's all settled now. All that's left is for you to call your lawyer and make sure everything's okay." The next morning, I got up early to drive back to the state. As soon as I got home, I called my attorney. I explained to him that I had a job offer out of town and wanted to make sure it was okay to accept. He said there shouldn't be a problem as long as I didn't leave the state. I called Don Fine out and accepted his offer. We quickly agreed on a start date. That night at work, I submitted my 2 weeks' notice of resignation after my shift. Trevor and I stopped by Gino's for a beer. We realized this was the end of an era for us. Next week, Trevor was starting an internship at another plant across town. The rest of the week, I started packing. Jack called me every few days to ask about Samantha. He and Brenda were sad that she was still up north, but I talked to my mom about it, and she insisted that Brenda call her. My mom, Dad, Jack, and Brenda had always gotten along great, and Mom wanted them to come up north to see their granddaughter. That cheered them up a bit. Donna never came with them, probably because of a court order. Whenever Jack called, he wanted to talk about Donna. I usually let him go on for a few minutes, but always cut him off when he started saying Donna missed Sam and me and wanted to talk. I told him I would wait until my attorney and the court settled things. Donna even wrote me a letter which I returned unopened. The turmoil made it difficult for me to eat and sleep, and I questioned my decisions and actions. I didn't want to be reminded of this more than necessary. After Jack and Brenda took her home from the county jail after our fight, Donna didn't leave her room for days. She cried and slept, not even going out to eat. Brenda finally dragged her outside and made her answer her attorney's calls. The hospital suspended her without pay while they investigated. Today, when Jack called and gave me the usual update about Donna, I told him about my plans to move. He was quiet for a few minutes and finally said, "I guess this really is the end. I think we were still hoping you two could get past this." "No, Jack. I already told you that's not going to happen," I said quietly. "It's going to make things even worse for Donna," he said in frustration. "It can't be helped, Jack," I said simply. It was kinder than saying I didn't care about Donna's mental health. I told him I was getting ready to move but didn't know what to do with the furniture. There were only a couple of things I wanted to keep. The rest I decided to leave for Donna. After talking for a while, I realized she would probably never come back to the house we were renting, so I offered to put everything in storage and pay the first 3 months' rent. Jack decided that was for the best. The next 10 days flew by quickly. I went back up north for Memorial Day weekend. Sam was in all her glory with my brother John, his wife, and their 2 kids visiting. Sam only went out to see the neighbors a couple of times. Cassie's parents and her brother Jason were visiting Harvey for the weekend, and they were very busy. I never got to talk to Cassie, and I only saw her from afar when she was at the lake during my last week at the plant. I only worked 2 days and took 3 days off. I took a couple of guys from my department, including Trevor, and we moved everything in a day. I met up with Jack to give him the keys to the warehouse and some boxes of Donna's stuff that I had sorted through that I thought she might need. On my last day in town, I met with my attorney to discuss a few things. Donna had finally gotten in touch with the divorce attorney who had called him. She still insisted that she didn't want a divorce and wanted to try marriage counseling. I firmly told him no and told him to proceed. On Friday, I packed up the pickup and trailer with the last of my belongings, gave the keys to the landlord, and left town. As I drove farther and farther away, it felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders. I felt like I had finally put everything behind me and everything was going to be okay again. Sam was overjoyed that I was staying. She chatted nonstop for almost an hour. First, she asked about Mom and if she missed her, then about Grandpa Brenda and Grandpa Jack, who had come to visit earlier in the week. Finally, she fell silent, talking about boat rides with Casey and Casey teaching her to swim. Later, when she went to bed, I asked my mom about her fascination with Casey and whether Casey was really interested in spending so much time with her. Mom paused for a moment and smiled. I really think Casey thinks Sam is the most wonderful child she's ever met. Casey really is a sweet girl. I was so exhausted that night that I slept until 9 in the morning. Mom was bustling around the kitchen and told me that Sam had left with Dad and Harvey to go to the hardware store. She wanted to make me breakfast, but I said no. I told her I wanted to go for a run first. One of my goals was to get back into running. It was about 5 miles around the lake, which was tough for me in my current shape. But I decided to give it a try. After almost an hour, I staggered into the house, sweating from the morning sun, happy that I made it all the way without stopping. I put on my swim trunks, grabbed a towel, and walked out the front door to the lake. Throwing the towel on the sand, I walked to the water and dove in. I surfaced, gasping from the cold. I took a few strokes, went in deeper, and floated on my back, trying to ignore the cold. I heard hooting and hollering from Harvey's pontoon tied to his dock next door. I looked over and saw my mom, Sam, and another woman I assumed was Casey, pointing at me and laughing. I walked back to shore, grabbed a towel, and dried myself off, putting the towel around my neck. I walked over to Harvey's dock and onto his pontoon. Sam jumped off the boat, ran up to me, and gave me a hug. "Oh, Daddy, you were so funny," she giggled. "I'm glad I could entertain you all," I smiled at her, and we all laughed. Sam took my hand and pulled me onto the pontoon. Daddy, this is Casey. She's teaching me how to swim and everything." She was practically ecstatic. I looked at Casey and smiled. "Hey, Casey. It's good to see you again. It's been a few years. Thank you for spending time with Sam. It means a lot to me." Casey looked me straight in the eye and gave me a big smile. It had been years since anyone, male or female, had made such an instant impression on me. "It's my pleasure, Ken. Sam is such a wonderful girl. We just have such a great time together." I couldn't agree more, but we can't have Sam hearing us talk about her like that. We can't let it get to her head, can we? I smiled at Sam and stroked her head as she giggled. I tried not to stare at Casey too obviously. She was wearing a two-piece swimsuit, not quite a bikini, but close. She was tall and had the build of a swimmer. She was fit, but couldn't have weighed more than 130 pounds. She had all the curves in the right places. Her brown hair was cut short, and her skin had a healthy tan from spending time outdoors. Her hazel eyes sparkled as she looked at me. I glanced at my mom, who smiled at me knowingly. "Now that you've had your run and swim, would you like some breakfast?" She laughed. "That would be great. Has everyone else already eaten?" I asked. "You were the only lazy one this morning. Come on, you can catch up with those two later," she said, jumping off the boat. I followed her down the dock. I turned around to Sam and Casey, and I thought Casey was watching me. "Are you staying here, Sam?" I asked. Casey seemed to blush, but laughed. "We'll just be here for a while. She'll be fine." As I followed my mom into the house, she looked at me out of the corner of her eye and said, "Well, what are you thinking?" "About what?" I tried to play dumb. "Don't tell me that. I saw the look on your face when she smiled at you, and you smiled back. You can't fool me. I've been around this block a few times before," she said knowingly. Okay. I can't say I didn't like what I saw, but aren't you getting a little ahead of yourself, Mom? It's only been a month or so, you know," I said unconvincingly. She replied firmly, "Not if it's really over. And I know you. Once you make up your mind, there's no going back. Besides, Brenda and I talked when she and Jack were here last week. Donna finally came clean and told her the whole story, and Brenda told me some of the things you didn't want me to know. I can't imagine you taking her back after that." Mom flinched when she said that. Not knowing what to say, I just shrugged. "Well, I can't imagine rushing into another relationship either. It must take some time to get over it. Besides, who would be interested in a single father who couldn't keep his wife from cheating?" I said bitterly, voicing my fears and insecurities. Mom stopped, turned around, and looked me seriously in the face. "Now, Ken, put those thoughts out of your head. You've faced your problems like a man, made tough decisions, and taken responsibility for your daughter. Anyone can see that. Your father and I are proud of you. Harvey and Casey know about your divorce. We couldn't hide the fact that you and Sam came here to live without Donna. As for anyone being interested in you, have you looked in the mirror lately?" Caught off guard by her outburst, I just shook my head. "You should. I bet you've lost 10 pounds in the last couple of months. You've always been fit, but now you don't have any extra weight on you. And you've never been unattractive. Your face looks more defined, and you have enough wrinkles to look mature. With your education, experience, and prospects, you're a great catch." "Oh, Mom, you're my mom. You have to say that," I said, looking down in embarrassment. "Go get changed and I'll make you breakfast," she said, letting me go. The rest of the weekend went by without any problems. I helped Dad and Harvey with a project in the garage and did a little fishing with Sam. Sunday night, Jack called to talk to Mom and Dad about visiting Samantha again. After talking to him for a few minutes, Mom handed me the phone and said, "Jack wants to talk to you." "Hi, Jack. How's Brenda?" I asked. "She's better. Thanks for asking. I wanted to ask you something. I gave Donna the card that Sam sent. She said to tell you thank you, but she'd like you to write her back. I know the restraining order is still in effect, but would you mind?" I thought for a moment. Finally, I said slowly, "I think it would be okay, Jack, as long as Donna pretends to be sick and goes to the doctor. And she shouldn't write about us getting back together or make promises she can't keep." Jack exhaled noisily and said, "Thank you, Ken. You have no idea how much this means to us and to her, and the pretense about her being in treatment isn't far from the truth. Last week, we finally sent her to counseling for depression. We're really concerned for her safety." "No problem, Jack," I said awkwardly. "We'll be there tomorrow afternoon. Your mom asked us to stay the night, so maybe we can talk some more." "Yeah, sure," I said without enthusiasm, and we hung up. The next day, I headed to the county center to start my new job. For the first few hours, my boss drove me around the county, introducing me to everyone, including the road commissioner and several members of the road commission board. After that, he paired me with another engineer, and we drove all over the county reviewing current and proposed road projects so I could get my bearings. By the time I got home, I was pleasantly exhausted. When I walked in the door, Mom, Dad, Jack, and Brenda were sitting in the living room. Samantha was sprawled out on Brenda's lap, resting her face against her chest and clutching several sheets of writing paper. Brenda stroked her hair and whispered something in her ear. Sam looked up when she heard me come in, and I could see tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daddy, Daddy, Mommy wrote me a letter, see?" She held out the paper for me to see. "That's so sweet, honey. What did she write?" I asked softly, smoothing the papers in her hands. "She said she loves me and misses me more than anything in the world, that she's been sick but is getting better, and she wants to come visit me. Can I, Daddy? Can I?" She looked at me with pleading eyes, tears glistening. I glanced at everyone else in the room and saw they were all emotionally affected by Sam's reaction. Mom and Dad were trying to wipe their tears. I looked at Sam again, took her in my arms, and said, "As soon as she's better, we'll make sure she comes and sees you. Okay?" "Okay. I'll save her letter in my notebook, and Grandma Bren will help me write a letter back." "That's a great idea, Sam," I said. Mom stood up and said, "Dinner is almost ready. Go get changed, Ken." That night after dinner, Sam went to bed. The four of us sat at the kitchen table. Jack said, "Are you serious, Ken, about what you said to Sam about visiting?" A little defensively, I replied, "About visiting? Yeah, that's what I meant. I know I can't separate them, and if Donna recovers, I'll agree to whatever the court advises. But as for custody, I want to make it clear that I will never give up custody of Samantha. Not after what she's done. I will do everything in my power to make sure that never happens. Make sure Donna realizes that..." Brenda patted my hand and said, "Thanks, Ken. Visits are all she can count on. Sam is better off with you right now. We all understand that seeing Sam will help Donna recover." I relaxed a little when Brenda said that. My biggest fear was that someone would try to take her away from me. Jack said that Donna had asked her divorce attorney to ask the court to grant her visitation rights, but he said it would be better if she settled the criminal cases first. In the morning, Donna met with her criminal defense attorney, who recommended that she take a plea bargain to get the charges resolved as quickly as possible. Her attorney had already been in contact with the prosecutor and was told that a plea bargain was possible. The prosecutor was mainly interested in the two men, and the case against the women was considered relatively minor. Jack and Brenda hoped to make a deal by the end of the week. I was a bit worried about how fast things were moving, but I tried not to show it. I wished for a few more months of calm before having to see Donna again. But for Sam's sake, I had to set aside my doubts and anger. When I got home from work the next day, Jack and Brenda had already left. Sam was at the lake with Casey. Mom told me that Harvey and Casey would join us for dinner, so if I wanted a quick swim, I'd have time. I quickly changed clothes, ran to the lake, and jumped in. I swam a few laps in front of the house and then climbed out. Casey and Sam were busy with something on Harvey's pontoon and didn't notice me, so I went back to the house to change. That night, the five of us had a great time. We talked about finishing school and finding new jobs. Harvey bragged to Casey, and Mom and Dad bragged about me. Occasionally, Casey and I would catch each other's eyes and smile. Each time I felt a spark, and then we'd quickly look away and start a new conversation. Eventually, the evening ended, and it was time for Sam to go to bed. Casey gave Sam a big hug and kiss, and then she and Harvey headed home. Over the next few weeks, this became a regular thing. Several nights during the week, we all had dinner together. We alternated between Harvey's house and ours. Harvey didn't like to cook, but Casey seemed to enjoy it. Often we would barbecue, and Harvey and Dad enjoyed competing. Weekends were busy with family or friends visiting us. My brother and his family were regular guests. One weekend, Trev and Vicky, his fiancée, came over. Trev had decided he didn't want to live alone. They seemed very happy together, and Vicky really liked Sam. I got the sense they were planning to have children in the future, and Sam introduced Casey to them before the weekend was over. The Sunday before they left, Trevor and I had a private talk. He'd had long work days since starting his internship, but he and Vicky had already been back to Black and Tan a few times. He quickly updated me. No one had seen Donna at the club, but Connie had. She started seeing James again when she and Curtis made bail. But Curtis was only out for a few days before getting arrested again. He had a fight with his soon-to-be ex-wife, and the police charged him with assault. His bail was revoked, and it looked like he'd stay in jail. Jack and Brenda visited Sam every week. The next week, after our conversation about Donna wanting to write to Sam, Jack told us that Donna would plead guilty to 1 count of drug possession. As a first-time offender, she would receive probation, complete a drug treatment program, face a fine, and do 200 hours of community service. She also had to testify against James and Curtis. She was fired from the hospital and was now looking for a job. Due to court fees, fines, and legal fees, Donna was broke, and Jack and Brenda were trying their best to help her. A few days later, my attorney called to inform me that a divorce hearing had been scheduled. Donna's attorney told him that she was only asking for regular visitation. She agreed not to file for custody and to accept the furniture and money left in our accounts as a fair settlement. My attorney said that given her record, we could insist on supervised visitation. If I didn't want to contest it, I wouldn't even have to attend the hearing. I agreed, and he assured me that a final agreement could be reached within a couple of weeks. In the evening, Mom and Dad left to play cards with friends, and I put Sam to bed. I walked down to the lake, sat on Mom's big wooden swing, and stared at the water and the night sky, thinking about the divorce and what would happen when dating started. As I sat there, I heard someone approaching. I looked up and saw Casey. "Hey, Ken, need some company?" she asked cheerfully. "Hi, Casey. Not sure if I'm good company, but have a seat," I said, moving over to make room on the swing. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, she asked softly, "Is something bothering you, Ken?" For a few minutes, I hesitated, thinking about what to say. It looks like Sam's mother will be allowed to visit her soon, and I don't know how to feel about that, I said in a shaky voice. Casey put her hand on my shoulder and asked, "Your mom told me a bit about your divorce. Do you want to talk about it?" I opened up to her, sharing what had happened and the aftermath. Talking to her wasn't as painful as I feared. Casey was sympathetic, shocked, and angry at Donna's behavior. She didn't make me feel bad about it. After an hour or two of talking, I was exhausted. Casey held my hand and whispered encouraging words. We heard voices from the side of the house. Mom and Dad were coming home. Casey leaned over and kissed me on the lips. "Be strong, Ken. Everything will work out." She jumped off the swing and ran back to the neighbor's house. Surprised and stunned by her kiss, I got up and walked back to the house. In the days that followed, Casey and I often met late at night, either at the swings or on a pontoon, to sit and talk. Summer became magical. Work was fun and interesting, and Casey and I spent almost every evening and weekend together. Sometimes we were alone, sometimes with others. A few times a week, Casey joined me on my runs around the lake. It was best when the three of us, Casey, Sam, and I, did things together. Sometimes Casey wanted to ski, and I would drive the boat while Sam watched and giggled at Casey's antics on the water. Other times, we took slow rides on the pontoon at dusk, or just strolled around the lake holding hands. True to his word, my attorney called a couple of weeks later to inform me that we had a tentative child custody agreement. The divorce would be finalized within 60 days after we both signed it. Donna would get 1 4-hour supervised visit per week at her expense. She would have to coordinate it. About a week later, I got a call from the court's social worker to set up the first visit. With some hesitation, I agreed to the following Sunday from 2 to 6. The social worker would pick up Sam along with Donna. Donna asked if her parents could attend too, and I agreed. That evening, after Sam went to bed, I sat down with her to explain. She was excited when I told her that Mommy was coming to pick her up on Sunday afternoon. "Daddy, is Mommy picking you up too?" she asked eagerly. "No, honey, just you. Mommy, Grandma Brown, and Grandpa Jack will be together." Sam fell silent and tears filled her eyes. "Daddy, don't you want to see Mommy?" she asked. Slowly, I said, "Sam, when Mommy got sick, we decided she needed to stay with Grandma Brown and Grandpa Jack until she got better. You and I are living with Grandma and Grandpa here at the lake so I can start my new job." Sam looked doubtful but replied, "Since then, Mom and Dad decided we won't live together anymore. Sometimes adults do that. But if they have kids, they still love them and take care of them together." Sam started to cry softly, and I hugged her tightly, trying to keep my own tears at bay. "Now, Sam, you can see your mom every week. As she gets better and you get older, you can see her more often if you want." Sam pulled away and looked at me with her chin quivering. "You mean when I turn 5, I can see her all the time?" I got into bed with her, and we talked until she calmed down and fell asleep. I slipped out of bed and went to the living room where Mom and Dad were watching TV and reading. Mom looked at me carefully and asked, "How did it go?" "Better than I expected, I think. She seems to have accepted it. I don't know how she'll feel when she sees Donna. I'll call Jack tomorrow and have him explain to Donna what I told Sam." "Why don't you tell Donna yourself?" she asked, looking at me intently. "I'm not ready for that yet," I admitted. "You'll have to talk to her sometime," she said. I sighed. "Yeah, I know." I was silent for a few minutes, deep in thought. "I'm going to the lake for a few minutes." Mom looked at me understandingly. "Tell Casey I really enjoyed the cherry pie she made for dessert last night," Mom said, and she and Dad grinned at me. "Sure, if I see her," I said. "Everyone on this side of the lake knows you two are dating except you," Dad said, laughing at my obvious discomfort. He added, "Relax, Ken. No one, including Harvey and Casey's parents, minds that you two look at each other like you're the last sip of water in the middle of the desert," said Mom. I could feel myself blushing and didn't know what to say. "Now run along, dear. She's too nice a girl to keep waiting long," said Mom kindly. So I turned and walked out the door feeling a bit foolish. Was it really that obvious? Being in a relationship scared me. Admitting it scared me even more. But I had to admit that Casey was special. When I thought about her, I felt unsure of what to do. I walked down to the lake and saw a dark figure standing by a large maple tree near the water. As I got closer, Casey reached out and took my hand. "What took you so long, Ken?" she asked with concern. I had to explain to Sam about her mom and me, about us not living together anymore and what it meant to her. I stayed with her until she fell asleep. Donna is coming to visit her on Sunday, I added. Casey hugged me and looked into my eyes. Sam is strong and she has you. She'll find a way to accept it, she said and kissed me gently. I pulled away slightly and smiled at her. Mom and Dad just told me that we're dating and I'm the only one who won't admit it. Is that true? It's about time. Grandpa kept saying you must have brain damage or something, she laughed. Casey, I'm sorry if I disappointed you. It's only been a couple of months since my marriage fell apart. I'm not sure about anything anymore. Well, I'm sure. And as long as one of us is okay with it, that's enough. I've wanted to take this relationship to the next level for a while. Are you sure, Casey? I asked anxiously. Ken, I've been in relationships before. Some ended well, some didn't. They all hurt. But this is the first time I feel like I'm in love. I've told myself I wouldn't fall in love again, she said, looking at me nervously. I reached out and took her hands. Casey, I've been trying not to admit how I feel about you. I want you, but I'm afraid. My confidence has taken a hit since my marriage ended. Can you understand that? Casey put her arms around me and rested her head on my shoulder, and I held her tightly. Yes, I understand. I hate what she did to you, but not all women are like that. Let me show you, please. Casey, I'm not sure about anything except that I don't want to lose you. Let's plan something for Friday night. Just the two of us, okay? She smiled at me in the moonlight. It's a date and a promise. The next night, I told my mom that I wanted to take Casey out on a real date on Friday night. Just the two of us. I asked if she could take care of Sam for me. She laughed and said, Sure. I told her I was thinking of going to the Blue Grill on the other side of the lake. It was a car ride away, but they also had docks for boaters. I wondered if we should take the pontoon since it would be a warm and clear night. On Friday night, I went to pick up Casey. She was wearing a sleeveless summer dress that showed off her figure and tanned arms and legs. We drove slowly along the calm lake as the sun set. We talked quietly and enjoyed each other's company. Dinner was relaxed, with fried fish and a couple of glasses of wine. We talked about many things: Sam, college, my job, and its prospects. She confessed that she had fallen in love with Sam before I even moved north. She hadn't thought about motherhood until then, and then she met me again and found her thoughts taking a completely different direction. I laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. I mentioned how strange it was that she hadn't found a job yet. She laughed, reached across the table, took my hand and said, Ken, I've turned down several job interviews in Detroit. I hope you're not angry. Embarrassed? No, of course not. I just don't want to leave here right now. Can you understand that? She asked sincerely. I understand, I said. We looked into each other's eyes and smiled. Nothing more needed to be said. After dinner, we went back to the pontoon, turned on the running lights, and pulled away from the dock. Casey stood next to me as I got behind the wheel. She leaned over and said quietly, Let's stop at the sandbar, okay? Without answering, I turned the boat toward the dark shore. The sandbar was a favorite spot for boaters, where they anchored their boats and had picnics and parties during the day. Some summer nights, people would gather there, build a fire, drink beer, and have fun. There was enough starlight to swim across the lake and out onto the sand. I shut off the engine as the pontoons creaked along the bottom. I dropped the bow anchor on the sandbar. The air was calm and the lake was like glass, so the boat wouldn't drift. I sat down next to Casey. She put her arm around me and we kissed. The next day was Saturday. Casey's mom, dad, and brother came to the house for the weekend. We were out the night before, so we didn't get to see them. Sunday came, and Sam was beyond excited to see her mother. I, on the other hand, was nervous, wondering how the visit would go. Shortly before 2, I heard a car pull up, and a few minutes later I heard Jack yell, "Hello!" as he entered the house. I went to the back door and saw Jack standing there with a middle-aged woman I had never seen before. "Ken, this is Mrs. Christensen. She's from the Traverse County Courthouse. She'll be overseeing the visitation." I said hello, and we shook hands. Mrs. Christensen explained that her role was to observe and report on the visitation, making sure it was taking place in a safe and healthy environment. She would report all her observations to me in the court. I nodded and assured her I didn't think there would be any problems. Jack said that Donna was waiting in the car with Brenda. They planned to take Sam to the county park for a picnic. Afterward, they would drop Sam off and drive back home. I nodded and said I would pick Sam up. I walked out to the front yard and yelled down to the lake, "Sam, Sam, Grandpa Jack's here!" Sam dashed out of the sand where she had been playing and ran down the path toward the house. "Grandpa Jack, is Mommy here? Is she here?" "Of course she is, Sam. She's in the car with Grandma," said Jack. We followed Sam as she ran out the back door. From 30 feet away, we could see the side of the car at the edge of the garage. I saw Donna get out of the car and kneel down to catch Sam as she flew into her arms, screaming, "Mommy!" Donna grabbed her and stood up in one motion, wrapping her arms around Sam. Donna looked up at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. She seemed to whisper the words, "Thank you," to me. Feeling my eyes burn, I turned away and said to Jack and Mrs. Christensen, "Have a good visit. I'll see you around 6. They nodded and headed to the car to leave. I walked back to the house where Dad and Mom had already returned from the lake. I felt incomplete and worried about Sam's departure. Mom and Dad assured me that there was no reason to worry. Sam would come back and everything would be fine. I nodded and stared out the window. "I thought you might like to know that we're invited to a barbecue this afternoon with Harvey, Casey, her parents, and Jason. I thought meeting Casey might cheer you up," said Mom. I smiled at her and replied, "Thanks, Mom. That would be great." Later, as we walked up to Harvey's patio, Casey walked over to me, took my hand, and kissed me on the lips. I looked up and saw everyone watching us and smirking. "What?" I said, blushing. "Looks like someone came to their senses this week. Where was I when it happened?" Harvey chuckled, and Casey's mom and dad laughed with him. "Grandpa, Mom, Dad, behave yourselves, or we'll take the boat out and leave you behind," said Casey sternly. "Here, you two have a beer and relax," said Harvey nonchalantly. Everyone laughed, and we sat down to enjoy our food and a couple of beers. It took my mind off Sam, but Casey could tell I was worried. Close to 6, I went back to our house to wait. I heard a car pull up and was already waiting at the door. When Jack and Mrs. Christensen walked up, I walked out and saw Donna standing by the car, holding Sam and speaking softly. "Mr. Colville, Mrs. Colville had a wonderful time with her daughter. She was affectionate and loving. I didn't notice anything concerning. It was obvious they both miss each other very much, and I will recommend that the court allow them to continue seeing each other," said Mrs. Christensen. I nodded. "I understand and thank you," I said with some relief. "Thank you, Ken. Seeing Sam will really help Donna," said Jack. "Of course, Jack. When would you like to schedule the next visit?" I asked. Jack felt awkward for a moment. "Well, Ken, we're not sure. You see, having Mrs. Christensen watch is expensive. With all her legal fees, Donna doesn't have much money and hasn't found another job yet. We're helping her as much as we can." "Oh, I'm sorry. I never thought about that," I said. I looked back at Donna and Sam, who were talking and smiling, completely engrossed in each other. Lost in thought, I forgot about Jack and Mrs. Christensen. Jack cleared his throat and said, "Well, Ken, I think we should get going." Making a quick decision, I said, "Wait a minute, Jack. Mrs. Christensen, would you mind if I asked my attorney to remove the formal supervision clause from the custody agreement? I'd be comfortable with Jack and Brenda overseeing the visits." "No objections," she said. "Are you sure, Ken? That would be a big help," Jack said with a broad smile, shaking my hand enthusiastically. "I'll call my attorney tomorrow," I said. Jack and Mrs. Christensen walked back to the car. Donna gave Sam one last hug and kiss, then set her down. Sam ran up the driveway, excited. "Daddy, Daddy, Mommy got me a new Barbie. She has a swimsuit and I can play with her by the water," she said, showing off her new doll. I made the appropriate remarks and took her hand as she waved goodbye to Donna, Jack, and Brenda. A few days later, Jack called again. He thanked me warmly for removing the supervision and said they would like to return Friday afternoon. I said that was fine. I no longer felt I needed to be there when they took Sam. Jack hesitated for a moment, then slowly said, "Ken, I know you've refused in the past, but Donna would like to talk to you. It's very important. Her counselor says she needs to talk to the people she's hurt to get better." My first reaction was anger, and I almost said no. But then I remembered my mom's words that I would have to talk to her eventually. I thought about Casey, too. I knew I had to move on with my life. I exhaled slowly and said, "Okay, Jack. What are you guys planning?" We decided that Friday night after her visit with Sam, we would stay at the Doherty Hotel. Donna was hoping you would meet her at the hotel restaurant for dinner, he said hopefully. "Okay, I get home from work around 5:30. I can meet her at 7. Will that work?" Jack sighed with relief. "Yeah, thanks, Ken." That night, sitting on the swing and hugging Casey, I hesitated to tell her about dinner with Donna. Finally, I blurted it out. She took it calmly, but I could tell it worried her. She assured me she was okay with it, though not very convincingly. After some discussion, she went home earlier than usual. I decided to go to bed and try to forget about it. On Friday, I got home from work, and Sam was already home from Donna's visit. She sat on my lap, happily talking about everything. Finally, she asked, "Can I go play with Casey now?" I replied, "Sure." Mom commented, "Sam and Donna reunited quickly, didn't they?" I nodded. Mom hesitated and then asked, "Does that bother Casey? Your reunion with Donna, I mean? She's been very quiet the last couple of days. I guess she's unsure about you after all. You were married to Donna for almost 6 years. I think she's afraid Donna will come back into your life, at least through Sam." "Well, that's what you have to realize. You and Donna are going to have to maintain a relationship until Sam grows up, that's for sure," Mom said. I just hummed and went to my room to change. I pulled into the Doherty Hotel parking lot a few minutes before 7. I walked into the lobby and saw Donna standing at the entrance to the restaurant. She watched me as I walked toward her. "Hi, Donna. You look good." "Thanks, Ken. I know I look better than I did a month ago, but you're the one who looks good. The tan suits you, and your face looks slimmer. It makes you look more grown up," she said, studying my face. "Yeah, but I spend a lot of time outdoors for work and at the lake, too," I said awkwardly. Donna actually looked thin, too thin. She was pale, and you could see crow's feet around her eyes. Her clothes, hair, and makeup were carefully chosen. It was obvious she was trying to keep herself in check. "Should we get a table?" I asked. "Sure. I made a reservation for us," she said nervously. We didn't talk much until we were seated and the waitress brought our menus. We talked a little about Sam and my new job while we ordered. I got a salad and coffee since I wasn't hungry. Donna ordered soup and salad with hot tea. As we talked, I saw Donna gradually relax, realizing that I wasn't going to verbally attack her. After we seemed to have exhausted our small talk, Donna cleared her throat and said in a low voice, "Ken, I want to thank you for a few things. Thanks for removing the supervision for Sam's visits and for giving Dad the money for my bail. I was such a burden to him and Mom. I know I'll never be able to repay them or you, but most of all, thank you for taking care of Samantha. At least she had one parent who cared for her." Feeling awkward, I tried to change the subject. "What are your plans now, Donna?" Without answering, she continued, "I know Dad told you that I've been going to psychological counseling for some time now. I graduated from a substance abuse program and did community service at a women and children's shelter. I've also gone back to attending our old church, and I'm in counseling with one of the pastors." She looked up at me for the first time since we sat down. "It's important to me that you know how much I've changed." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "The last thing you asked me when you left me in prison was why? My therapist says that to move on with my life, I have to answer that question. There's no clear answer. It was a combination of drugs, alcohol, and something wrong with me. All I can do is explain how it happened and hope you can forgive me." Tears ran down her cheeks, and she wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. "Donna, you don't need to explain anything. It's in the past now," I said. "No, I have to explain. I promised myself I wouldn't cry," she said, pulling herself together. Our food arrived, and we both sat in silence, picking at it. Eventually, we set it aside and just sipped our coffee and tea. Donna sat with a sad expression, looking out the window. Finally, she turned to me and said, "Please let me get this over with, okay? After our big fight about my first date with Connie, I thought things were fine between us. But then Connie started calling every couple of days, wanting to do it all over again. I kept telling her no, but she kept insisting, saying I deserved some time to myself. After all, I'm the one stuck at home with Sam every night. After a couple of weeks, she started coming over after Sam went to bed. I'd open a bottle of wine and we'd talk. She talked about going to clubs, about music and dancing, about the men she met. She said it was so much fun. The second time she was at my place, she lit up a joint and tried to talk me into taking a drag, but I refused. The next time she came over, she took another drag, and this time I didn't refuse. You were busy with your studies, trying to get your degree and working 6 nights a week. We didn't spend much time together because of our schedules. When you did have time, it seemed like Sam was more important to you than me. With Connie's help, I convinced myself that you were ignoring me and that I deserved some time to myself. Every time Connie came over, we'd have a couple of glasses of wine and get high. The next time she suggested we go out, I agreed. The following Friday, we went to the club. There were some guys sitting at a table next to us, and one of them came over. It was James. He and Connie dated from time to time, which I didn't find out until later. I also found out later that Connie had called him and told him we would be there. James introduced Curtis to us, and the 4 of us sat together. We danced, talked, had a few drinks, and it was fun. The following Friday, we went to the club again and met up with James and Curtis. After a few hours, James suggested we go to another club to hear some real music. I was reluctant at first, but after a few glasses of wine and a joint, they convinced me it would be okay. Connie and I got a lot of attention that night. I realized later that Curtis was starting to act possessive. He would put his arm around me, hold my hand, make sure I only danced with him, and keep other guys away. James and Connie excused themselves to the car for a while. When they came back, Connie's face was flushed, and she was giggling the whole time. Later, when Connie drove me home, I told her I wasn't sure I should be doing this. She assured me it was just good fun. She repeated this to me several more times during the week when she stopped by. The next time we went out, Connie said that James and Curtis wanted us to meet them at the club. Since we had been there before, I agreed. The guys met us at the door and led us through the crowd. Later, we sat in the back seat listening to the radio and talking. It felt so good. After that, I got hooked. I was living 2 lives. My life with you and Sam was nice and safe. You loved me. The other life was wild and crazy and dangerous. I knew I could never let you know about it. I also knew I needed to stop. But I kept telling myself, 1 more week. 1 more week. I knew I was being crazy and irrational, and I suspected that Curtis and James were doing something illegal, but I ignored it. I wanted to keep the thrill going. That night, Curtis and James drove us to the hotel. Then the police burst through the door, and my life was over. She hesitated and looked at me calmly. You know the rest. When you came to the police station and showed me the pictures, you held a mirror up to my eyes. I saw what I had become. You called me a whore, and you were right. I wanted you to make things right. But I hurt you the most. I ruined everything, and you and Sam, the 2 people I love most, got hurt the most. We sat in silence. I didn't want to ask any questions. She had filled in the blanks perfectly. Finally, she raised her eyes to me. You asked me what my plans are now. I guess that's up to you. She hesitated for a few moments. Do we have any chance, Ken? Is there any chance you'll forgive me and try to rebuild our family? I sat in silence. Somehow I knew that if we were together, this moment would come. I had once loved this woman more than anyone else in the world. She had given me our daughter, but the memories and knowledge of those events could never be erased. The only thing that could tempt me was the fear of being alone. But now I knew I wasn't alone, and if she accepted me, I would never be alone again. Donna, it's not about me forgiving you. It's about whether you can forgive yourself. As far as we're concerned, I shook my head. There's no turning back for me. With tears in her eyes, she asked, Is there someone else, Ken? I nodded. I think so. At least I hope so. Is it Casey? She asked sadly. I nodded silently. Sam talks about her all the time. She's happy, isn't she? She said wistfully. I got up to leave. I couldn't wait to get home. Donna gathered her purse and we walked out into the hall. She turned and looked at me. Thank you, Ken, for talking to me. She kissed me on the cheek and walked toward the elevators. I turned and headed for the car without looking back. Now I knew what I wanted out of life. When I walked into the house, Mom, Dad, and Casey were sitting at the dining room table. There were crayons and a few of Sam's coloring books scattered around. You've been gone longer than I thought, Ken. Sam just went to bed. I'm sure she's still up if you want to say goodnight, Mom said. "In a minute, Mom," I said, looking at Casey. I must have looked grim as I walked in because Casey's face showed concern. "I'm going to go. You three probably want to talk," she said, getting up. I took her hand and pulled her back to the chair. I sat down next to her and didn't let go. "No, Casey, you're the one I want to talk to right now. I know exactly what I want in my future." Looking into her eyes, I said, "Casey, knowing what I've been through and what marriage means to me, and if Sam approves, will you marry me?" Casey suddenly turned pale and her mouth opened in a big O. Mom covered her mouth with her hands, tears in her eyes, and Dad smirked. But, was all Casey could get out. "Oh, and Casey, I love you. I've known that for a long time, but I couldn't say it until now." Casey put her arms around my neck and whispered in my ear, "Oh, Ken, yes, I want to marry you more than anything in the world." Mom was openly crying and Dad was hugging her, still smiling. Casey pulled away and looked at me anxiously. "But what about Sam? What if she doesn't want me?" "Let's go and find out," I said. I lifted her to her feet and headed down the hall to Sam's room. I knocked on the door and said, "Sam, it's Daddy." "Daddy, did you come to kiss me goodnight?" she said sleepily. "No, Sam, Casey and I want to talk to you, okay?" We walked into her room and I turned on the bedside lamp. Sam sat up, blinking. "Okay." Casey and I sat on the edge of her bed and I took Sam's hand. "Sam, would you mind if Casey and I got married? That means the three of us will be living together and Casey will be your second mom." Sam looked at us triumphantly and said, "Are we always going to live together? I'd like that." Then she asked anxiously, "What about Mom?" "Mom would still be your first mom, Sam, and you would still see her as much as you want. But Casey would be your second mom." Sam thought for a moment, then said, "If she's going to be my second mom, I can't call her Casey anymore." "What do you want to call me, Sam?" Casey asked quietly. "Casey's mom. Casey's mom." "Okay, I'll call you Casey's mom," Sam said cheerfully. And so she did. Over the next few months, Casey's mom became just Mom. The divorce was finalized about 6 weeks later. 2 months after that, we got married in a small ceremony at a local Methodist church, just in time for my parents to leave for Florida before the first snow. Trevor was my best man, and Sam, of course, was our flower girl. Seeing Casey and her dad follow Sam down the aisle was amazing. I found a house for us on a hill overlooking Grand Traverse Bay. We moved there right after we got married. It was in that house that we experienced our first winter in northern Michigan. I'm convinced that Casey got pregnant in front of the fireplace one cold, snowy night. Casey insisted on going off the pill a month before the wedding, something about a promise she'd made to Sam. I didn't bother asking for details. Casey went to work at Munson Medical Center and occasionally worked part-time at the local veterans hospital, but she had to quit after a year when her pregnancy made it hard for her to get around. Jack and Brenda got tired of driving to see Sam every week, so they moved 30 miles north. According to Jack, this suited everyone as they were 2 hours closer to their other grandchildren. Donna decided to stay with them and help care for her mother. She eventually found a job with a cardiac specialist group in the area. She and Sam see each other a couple of times a week, and sometimes Sam stays for the weekend. Donna and I don't socialize much, but I've heard she meets with friends occasionally. My brooding was interrupted by someone calling my name. I looked up to see my parents, Casey's parents, and Harvey crowded in the doorway of the hospital room. "Hold these babies and let me take a picture of all of you," Dad pleaded. "Hold on, Dad. Sam, you're sitting right here in front of me," said Casey. We placed one baby in each of Sam's arms, and Casey and I leaned on her shoulders, helping her support the babies, and smiled into the camera. This photo of the 5 of us, with Sam beaming into the camera, has a place of honor on our mantle. Every time I look at this photo, it reminds me that I am the luckiest person on earth. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.